Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today, and I thank the organizers and ASEM for having me here on behalf of ADB. Although I'm here on my personal capacity, and my comments are my own, not necessarily ADB's. But I would like to talk to you today about some of the issues that were already raised this morning by the speakers in the opening session, and also in the keynote address by Mr. Bert Hoffman, and build upon some of the points made there, and try and focus in on a few issues, and to focus it in more on Asia in particular. So let's begin by looking at broadly what the Fourth Industrial Revolution can mean. Let me also start by saying that most of my comments today are drawn from a joint publication between ADB and the World Economic Forum that we completed last year, and were able to present to the ASEAN leaders at the ASEAN Summit in Manila. The report is available online. In this day and age, I don't have to give you a hyperlink. If you just Google ADB and WEF, you will certainly find the report, which focuses in on preparing ASEAN in particular for the challenges and the opportunities of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So I'd encourage you to please look that up if you're interested in more detailed analysis of the points that I make today. So we've heard already about what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is likely to include: artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain, as we just heard, 3D printing, and so on. But I guess the point to remember, and this is worth repeating, is how this revolution is different from all the others. And here, the breadth and the speed is not like anything we've seen before. In fact, this is a problem with even trying to define the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's changing so rapidly that any definition we use presently could soon be out of date. So this is something we've not experienced before, and identifies the Fourth Industrial Revolution quite separately from all the others. And because of that, it will change almost every aspect of our lives. Yeah, okay. It seems I shouldn't be... Okay, thank you. Right. I've got bad eyesight. That's why I'm trying to stand closer to the screen. But, okay, so it'll transform almost every aspect of our lives in ways that will affect also the ways our communication with each other and with governments, businesses, and all other agents of day-to-day living. Right. So let me now move on to look at some of the, firstly, the broad economic implications of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We've heard some of this already today from our keynote speaker, but on economic growth, to start off with, the Fourth Industrial Revolution will create a large number of opportunities, especially for developing countries. Okay? And here, the opportunity for technological leapfrogging is one that I would like to highlight. An example is, for instance, avoiding landline connectivity through telecoms and moving straight to mobile telephony, right? In countries like Laos and Cambodia, where I do a lot of work, this is already happening. There's a huge social saving from avoiding the investment in the old technology and moving straight away to new technologies. Even in Cambodia, ADB is investing in solar parks in remote regions to try and bring electricity to people that have never had it before without having to connect to the grid itself. Now, this is a huge saving in social investment and also provides affordable access to electricity when it was never available in the past, right? So this is what the new technologies can do. And one estimate suggests that the benefits to ASEAN could range from around 220 billion up to 625 billion. Now that's a broad range because, again, the technologies are changing so rapidly and they are so hard to predict. If it's hard to predict what it is, it's harder to predict its impacts. Okay. It will also change consumer choices, it will lower costs, and it will raise the quality of the products and services that we consume. It will create new ways for citizens to connect to each other, and also it will provide services to areas that are not currently available, right? But all of this increased connectivity will also bring new risks. We heard earlier in the keynote address by Mr. Hoffman how, this type of connectivity means that firms know almost everything about us, and they can easily assess credit worthiness. That's a good thing in getting credit, but it's also a risky thing when they know everything about our personal lives and our spending habits and so on. So there are risks, and the Facebook scandal, I'm sure you've all heard of, has highlighted the kind of security and related concerns that we need to try and address. But luckily, the 4IR can also help us in trying to improve security through blockchain, as we've heard, and related technologies. Okay. But let me say a bit more about small and medium enterprises, because this is our focus in ADB. I think the great benefit here is to try and make growth more inclusive. Perhaps the greatest impact of the fourth industrial revolution, or the greatest concern, rather, will be its potential to increase inequality, right? Both within countries and between countries, okay? And this is why we need to work hard to make it more inclusive as far as possible, to try and mitigate the income inequality effects that might arise. And an important way to do that is to try and engage MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises, through the ability of the internet especially, to allow them to access markets and to produce, to export goods and services for the first time. Okay. Right. Another impact, broad economic impact that we've heard of already today is the employment consequences of the 4IR, right? The 4IR can create a lot of new opportunities in many new industries, but also there are concerns of threats to jobs, especially the low-skilled, repetitive industry, factory work, and assembly line workers, for instance. But over time, this could also spread to service jobs of higher skill and quality. So I'll try and come back to this a bit later on about how real are the concerns about job loss, but certainly it's an issue that we need to bear in mind, especially in developing countries. Okay. Now, let me try and move quickly through this because I think I'm going to keep an eye on time. I think there will be huge impacts on the nature of manufacturing as we go forward. The traditional model, right, of factory production using, large machines with large workforces and economies of scale is rapidly changing, right? Now, with additive manufacturing processes such as 3D printing, goods can now be produced at a centralized location. They can operate at scale, and they can produce high-quality standardized products, right? So in the future, long and complex supply chains may not be necessary anymore, right? Since entire products can be built from scratch to end without having to be assembled in different parts of the world as they are now, or even with the slicing of the value chain that we see happening especially in East and Southeast Asia. Okay, now let's look at who is ready to actually take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. We've heard already from the keynote address today that it is indeed the more developed countries, and it's the poorer developing countries that need to catch up and catch up fast. The recent report by the World Economic Forum found that only about 25 countries are fully prepared to try and take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution. Most of them are in Europe and North America. There are some in Asia. Korea is there, China, Japan, but also Malaysia and Singapore. But that's a lot of Asian countries that are not there, and this is particularly a concern to ADB, and we are trying to work hard with these countries to try and improve their capacity to prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. But the governments themselves in these countries are producing their national responses. Singapore has its Smart Nation initiative, Thailand 4.0, and Malaysia has its National Industry 4.0 policy framework to be launched, I think, this month, later this month. And of course, Korea, who's, as we've heard already, leading the way in many ways, not just in Asia, but around the world. He's taken the 4IR challenge very seriously, especially the current administration. But even under the current 5-year plan, Strategy 4 emphasizes establishing the core infrastructure, right, which is the backbone, if you like, of connectivity, commercializing 5G, investing in new technologies like artificial intelligence, and also increasing R&D, especially in SMEs, right? So these are very important initiatives taking place, and in many ways can be a role model for developing Asian countries in this region to try and prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, So let's finally, let me look at this issue of preparing for the future. Again, following on from what I just said about Korea's initiative, the investment in the backbone, in ICT infrastructure is going to be critical, right? And this is still a big challenge in many of the poorer countries, where, living in Korea with one of the highest speeds, if not the highest speeds of internet connectivity, we can forget how in many parts of developing Asia, there's still no access to the internet, and this needs to be overcome. Businesses also have to look at investments in the broader upgrading of technology, and this can be quite costly, right? In some cases, in some of the poorer countries, entire production systems will need to be replaced, right, and upgraded. This is going to involve huge costs. Multilateral agencies like the World Bank and ADB and UN agencies can play some role, as can bilateral agencies, but at the end of the day, most of the financing will have to come from domestic or national sources, right? And we need to provide greater support to MSMEs if we are to allow the 4IR to be more inclusive and less disruptive, right? There are high costs associated with adopting new technologies, and for small and medium firms, some type of government support may be necessary. Larger firms are better equipped and can also tap FDI, but MSMEs will struggle without support. A critical factor in our preparations must be improving the investment in human capital, right? Even our model of education needs to change, with lifelong learning replacing traditional approaches. As one innovator put it, we need to learn how to learn, right? And keep learning. So traditional systems need to adjust. We need to augment cognitive skills such as maths and sciences, and we need to think about lifelong learning. That is a critical challenge, and perhaps one of the most important challenges that we need to address, especially in developing countries. Now, that's a long-term challenge. In the short to medium term, some of that challenge can be addressed by allowing greater labor mobility, right? Labor flows across borders can address short-term skill gaps. More advanced countries can transfer some of those skills to the to developing countries through labor mobility. And ASEAN is trying to foster that through its mutual recognition arrangements and making it easier for skilled labor to move across borders. But a lot more needs to be done, right? There's still quite a lot of inbuilt barriers to labor mobility. But that's just at the highest skill levels. As we know, Asia also has demographic changes taking place. There are aging societies like Korea and China, and then there are young societies like Indonesia, India, Cambodia, and so on. And so greater labor mobility will also allow some of the labor displacing effects or the job losses from 4IR in poorer countries to be absorbed by aging richer countries if greater labor mobility is allowed. So this will benefit both young and aging populations as well as developing and developed countries. Okay. And all of this means that we need to increase regional cooperation and integration, an area that ADB is very strongly involved in. And this is to recognize that we will need national, regional, and global efforts to try and address these challenges. We need new approaches to public-private collaboration. And we also need to try and increase cooperation to improve infrastructure connectivity across countries, as well as greater investment in research and development, R&D. Okay, so let me then finish or conclude by saying that despite all that we might hear, at the end of the day, defining the 4IR is in some sense an elusive task. It's forever changing, and we're all forever trying to keep track of its evolution. And because of that, predicting the likely impacts is made equally difficult, right? We can take guesses with as much information as we can gather, but we know that there will be significant impacts, and there will be both opportunities as well as challenges, right? And so responding through policy changes and institutional changes is critical, right? And it's never too early to start preparing for the fourth industrial revolution, and also it's never too late. So policymakers at national, regional, and global levels will need to start refashioning their institutions as well as their policy frameworks, and they need to do so quickly. So with that, let me end here, and I thank you for your attention.